Worked hard for ordinary. That's the thing people don't understand when they hear my story. I wasn't chasing anything extraordinary. I just wanted a decent credit score. A savings account that didn't make me wince, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing my financial life was clean. After years of living carefully, saying no to things I wanted, eating lunch at my desk instead of going out, I had finally built something solid. And the person who destroyed it was the one I had spent my entire childhood defending. My name is Serena. I'm 31 years old, and until about 3 years ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a person was losing a job or going through a bad breakup. I didn't know what real financial devastation looked like. I didn't know what it felt like to open a letter and watch your entire sense of security evaporate in under 60 seconds. I was 28 when it started. I had a 741 credit score. I know that number, the way some people know the date of their wedding anniversary, because I had worked for it deliberately, methodically, over years. I paid every bill on time. I kept my credit utilization low. I checked my credit report every few months the way other people check the weather. I was, by any reasonable standard, someone who had her financial life together. My younger brother. I'll call him by what he was to me then, which was the person I trusted most in my family, had always been the one I protected. Growing up, our household was chaotic in the way that happens when one parent leaves and the other never quite recovers from it. I was the older one. I held things together. I helped him with homework when our mom was working doubles at the hospital. I talked him through every crisis from middle school onward. When he was 22 and needed a cosigner for his first apartment, I said yes without thinking twice. That should have been the warning. It wasn't. He paid that rent. He was responsible about it. I told myself I had read him correctly. What I didn't know was that he had been reading me too, specifically, reading everything he could find about my financial identity. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten back from the gym, still in my workout clothes, and I was sorting through the mail without really paying attention. The envelope had the logo of a bank I didn't recognize. A regional lender in a state I had never lived in. I almost tossed it. Something made me open it. It was a delinquency notice. Past due balance, $312,000. On a home equity line of credit secured against a property in my name. I stood in my kitchen for what felt like a full minute without moving. I read it again. Then a third time. The address on the account was in a city 3 states away. The property was a single-family home I had never seen. The signature on the original application, according to the document number referenced in the letter, was mine. My hands were shaking when I pulled up my credit report on my phone. There were 4 accounts I didn't recognize. The $312,000 home equity line, a personal loan for $58,000, 2 credit cards with combined balances over $22,000, all of them opened within a 14-month window, all of them now in various stages of default. My credit score, the 741 I had spent years building, had collapsed to 498. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I'm not being dramatic when I say that. My legs genuinely stopped working. I sat there on the tile with that letter in my hand, and I thought about all the years of packed lunches and declined vacations and automatic transfers to savings. And I felt something break in my chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite rage, but was some combination of both, that I still don't have a clean word for. I called the bank. The automated system was a maze. It took 40 minutes to reach a human being. When I finally did, I said I was calling about a delinquency notice and that the account was not mine. The representative was polite in that careful, scripted way that tells you they have had this conversation before and have been trained to say as little as possible. She told me I needed to submit a fraud dispute in writing with supporting documentation. She told me the process could take 60 to 90 days. She told me I should also contact the credit bureaus. 60 to 90 days. I had a $312,000 delinquency on my record and the bank's timeline was 2 to 3 months. I hung up and opened my laptop and started doing what I always do when I'm overwhelmed. I made a list. Every account, every balance, every institution I needed to contact. I pulled the full credit report and went through it line by line, and that's when I saw it. The address listed on two of the newer accounts was one I recognized. It was my brother's apartment. I want to describe what it feels like to see something like that and understand what it means in real time. It's not a dramatic revelation. There's no score of music. It's quieter than that. It's the slow, cold settling of a truth you have been not knowing on purpose. The way you sometimes avoid looking directly at something because some part of you already suspects what you'll see. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring, casual, warm, asking how I was doing. And I said, very calmly, because I had learned from a childhood of managed chaos how to be calm when I needed to be. I said, I need you to tell me about the home equity line. The silence on his end lasted about 4 seconds. Then he said, what are you talking about? I read him the account number from the letter. Another silence. Longer this time. Serena, he started, and the way he said my name told me everything. Not a denial, not confusion. Just my name, spoken like the beginning of an explanation he hadn't finished preparing yet. I hung up. I wasn't ready to hear whatever he was going to say. I needed to know more before I sat across from his words and had to decide what to do with them. I called a lawyer that same afternoon. Not a family friend. Not someone I'd gotten a referral for at a dinner party. I found a consumer protection attorney who specialized in identity theft cases, and I paid for an hour of her time. Her name was Ms. Holloway, and she did not soften anything she told me. She said I needed to file a police report immediately. She said waiting for any reason, including the reason of not wanting to report a family member, would hurt me in every subsequent proceeding. She said the banks and the credit bureaus needed to see a police report number to move forward with fraud disputes. She said the sooner I filed, the better. I called the police that evening. Filing a police report against your own brother is not something that happens cleanly. The officer who took my statement was professional, patient, and completely matter-of-fact in a way I found unexpectedly helpful. He wasn't going to let me make it emotional, and that kept me anchored. I laid out the documentation. The delinquency notices, the credit report, the address connection. He took down the information and gave me a report number, and I sat in my car in the police station parking lot afterward and cried for about 20 minutes before I drove home. I hadn't told my mother yet. I'd been avoiding it because I knew how it would go. My mother has always had a specific relationship with my brother. He is the baby, the one she worries about, the one who in her mind has always needed protection more than I have. It's not a malicious thing. It's just how it calcified over the years. I was the one who was fine. He was the one who needed help. Even when the evidence to the contrary was right in front of her, she tended to find ways to reframe it. I drove to her house 2 days after filing the police report. I sat at her kitchen table and I laid out everything. The letters, the credit report, the account numbers, the address match, and I watched her face move through a series of expressions I recognized from childhood. Shock first. Then, something that looked almost like grief. Then, and this is the part that still sits in my chest like a stone, a careful rearrangement into concern. Not for me, but about the situation, about what this meant for him. He must be in some kind of trouble, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. Mom, he stole my identity. He took out almost $400,000 in debt in my name. We don't know the whole story yet. I have the documents. She started talking about how he'd been struggling, how he'd lost his job the previous year, how she didn't want to see him go to prison, and I understood all of that. I genuinely did. But I also had a $488 credit score and a $312,000 delinquency and a lawyer telling me the recovery process would take, at minimum, 2 years. And that was if everything went smoothly, which it rarely does. I asked my mother if she thought what he did was wrong. She said she thought it was complicated. I went home and didn't call her for 3 weeks. My aunt reached out about 10 days after that. She's my mother's older sister. I've always been close with her, or thought I was. She left me a voicemail asking if we could talk. I called her back the next morning. She started with sympathy. She acknowledged that what had happened was serious. And then, carefully, she began to make the case for grace. She talked about family. She talked about forgiveness. She talked about not wanting to see this tear us apart. She talked for a long time about the importance of not letting one bad decision define a relationship. I waited until she was finished. Then, I asked her one question. Would you be willing to put up your home as collateral to help cover the debts he put in my name? The silence was instructive. That's not really. The situation isn't. Because that's what grace would cost right now, I said. Not my grace. Actual money. The $392,000 in debt he opened in my name. If the family wants me to be gracious, the family can be gracious in a way that has dollar signs attached to it. Otherwise, I think what you're really asking me to do is absorb the damage so everyone else stays comfortable. She didn't have an answer for that. We ended the call politely, and I haven't brought it up since. My brother reached out twice in the weeks after the police report. The first message was an apology, long, detailed, full of explanations about debt he'd gotten into, a loan shark he couldn't repay, a situation that had spiraled. I read it carefully. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because anything I said in writing at that point could complicate the legal proceedings, and my attorney had advised me to keep communication minimal. The second message was shorter. He asked if there was any way we could handle this privately without the police involvement. I showed that message to Ms. Holloway. She noted it and filed it. Here's the part that doesn't make it into most of the stories you hear about identity theft. The recovery is not a single dramatic event. It is not one phone call that fixes everything, one letter that clears your name, one hearing where the truth comes out and the accounts disappear. It is hundreds of hours of grinding, tedious, emotionally exhausting administrative work spread over years. I want to be specific about this, because the comment I remember most from when I eventually shared pieces of this story was from someone who said they appreciated that I didn't make it sound easy. So I'm going to tell you what it actually looked like. I filed formal disputes with all three major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, within the first week. Each dispute required documentation, the police report number, copies of the fraudulent account statements, a written explanation, and a copy of my government-issued ID. Each bureau has its own process, its own timeline, its own requirements. Some of the fraudulent accounts were removed within 30 days. Others took 6 months, 2 rounds of appeals, and a letter from my attorney. The home equity line was the most complicated. The property, the house my brother had purchased using my identity, was in my name legally. That meant I was, on paper, the owner of a home I had never seen. The fraud investigation required the lender to hire a title company to verify the chain of documentation. There were questions about whether the original closing had involved forged notarization. My attorney filed a complaint with the state banking regulator in addition to pursuing the civil fraud claim. The personal loan and credit card accounts were resolved faster, but faster is relative. The last one was removed from my credit report 14 months after I first filed the dispute. I learned things about myself during this period that I'm not sure I wanted to know. I learned that I have a very high tolerance for bureaucratic frustration, which is useful. I learned that I am capable of making phone calls I dread, to banks, to investigators, to attorneys, without letting the dread stop me. I also learned that I had been carrying a certain story about my family, specifically about my brother, that had never been entirely true. The story was, he needed me, and I protected him, and that was the shape of our relationship. What I had to reckon with was that the story was always at least partly fiction. Someone who sees you clearly, who loves you the way the story says, does not spend 14 months systematically dismantling your financial life. Whatever he felt for me, it wasn't the same thing I had been calling by that name. The criminal case moved on its own timeline. He was charged about 8 months after I filed the police report. The charges included wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. He retained an attorney. There were months of procedural hearings. I didn't attend most of them. My attorney kept me informed and advised me that my presence wasn't required and might be emotionally costly without strategic benefit. He pleaded guilty. I found out on a Wednesday afternoon when Ms. Holloway called me. He received a sentence that included restitution, which sounds like resolution. except that restitution orders are notoriously difficult to collect on, and the practical likelihood of me seeing any of that money was, according to my attorney, low. I've made my peace with that. What I haven't made peace with, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to, is the 2.5 years I spent in financial purgatory while the accounts were in dispute. The car loan I was denied because my credit was destroyed. The apartment I couldn't get approved for without a cosigner. I had to ask a coworker to be, which was humiliating in a specific quiet way that stayed with me. The promotion I went for at work that I didn't get, and whether the background check's financial component played a role, I'll never know for certain, but I think about it. My credit score now is 728. I'm not at 741 yet. I'm close. Every month I watch it tick upward like a clock I've been waiting on for years, and sometimes that number represents something bigger than just a number. It represents the version of me that existed before all of this. The one who had worked carefully and trusted the wrong person and lost years to the wreckage of that trust. My mother and I have a relationship now. But it's different. We don't talk about my brother. He is incarcerated. She visits him. I don't ask about those visits, and she doesn't offer information. There is a section of our relationship that is simply closed, like a room we've both agreed not to open, and we navigate around it with a kind of deliberate politeness that isn't warmth exactly, but isn't coldness either. It's survival. It's two people who love each other and are also unable to fully repair the damage of one terrible season. My aunt and I are cordial. We see each other at family gatherings. We talk about surface things. I don't hold any bitterness toward her specifically. I understand that what she asked me to do came from a real place of wanting the family to stay intact. I just also know that the cost of family staying intact was going to come entirely out of my account, figuratively and literally, and I wasn't willing to pay it. Someone asked me once, after I had shared some of this publicly in the careful way you do when you've processed something enough to talk about it, they asked me if I regretted filing the police report. I had to think about it. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to answer honestly. No, I don't regret it. Not because it fixed everything, it didn't. Not because it was easy. It was the hardest administrative and emotional labor of my life. But because the alternative was absorbing $392,000 in fraudulent debt, watching my credit remain destroyed, and never being able to hold my brother accountable for choosing to do that to me. And because on some level, I can only access when I'm being very honest with myself. Filing that report was the first time in my life I chose myself over the story I'd been told about who I was supposed to be in that family. I was the one who held things together. I was the one who was fine. I was the one who protected him. And then, one day, I decided I was done being the one who absorbed the damage, and I filed a police report, and I spent 2.5 years in a bureaucratic nightmare, and I came out the other side with a 728 credit score and a clearer sense of myself than I have ever had. If you are sitting with a situation right now where someone you love has done something that is costing you in ways you can measure with numbers and in ways you can't, and the people around you are asking you to be gracious, to consider the relationship, to think about what family means, I want to tell you something that took me a long time to learn. Grace is a real thing. Forgiveness is a real thing. And neither of them requires you to take on someone else's debt. You can forgive someone and still file the police report. You can love your family and still refuse to be the one who pays the bill. You can be a good person and still say, "This is not mine to carry." Protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel. It took me 3 years to understand that fully. I understand it now. My credit score is 728. I'm almost back, and every point of that number is mine. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any spiritual sense. I don't need a framework beyond the observable. I just mean that actions have weight, and that weight goes somewhere. My brother made a series of deliberate choices over 14 months. He didn't stumble into $392,000 of fraudulent debt in my name. He made that happen, carefully, repeatedly, using information he had, because I trusted him with proximity to my life. The consequence of those choices was not bad luck or bad timing. It was the natural, inevitable destination of the road he chose to walk. He reached it. I watched him arrive there. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who asked me to forgive him, to keep it private, to protect the family from the fallout, none of them were wrong to love him. I understand that impulse completely. But what they were asking, underneath all the language about grace and family and not letting one mistake define everything, was for me to be the surface that absorbed the damage so everyone else stayed intact. My mother, my aunt, the whole careful architecture of the family. It would all hold together if I just agreed to carry the weight. The math only worked if I was the one paying. I wasn't willing to pay anymore. That's the thing I want to say clearly, because I think it's the thing that took me longest to understand. Choosing yourself in a situation like that does not make you cold. It does not make you unloving. It does not mean you have failed at being a good person. It means you have finally understood that being good is not the same as being the one who absorbs everything. I spent years being the responsible one, the stable one, the one who was fine. And somewhere in that role, I had convinced myself that my job was to hold things together regardless of what it cost me personally. Filing that police report was the first time I said out loud, with my actions if not my words, I am not willing to pay this particular cost. And I meant it. The intelligence part? And I think this is what people miss when they look at a situation like mine from the outside, is that acting from clarity is not the same as acting from anger. I was angry, yes, of course I was. But the decision to file the report, to pursue the fraud claims, to refuse to handle it privately, those were not rage decisions. They were clear-eyed, methodical, informed by a lawyer's counsel and my own understanding of what was actually at stake. Rage would have had me making calls I'd regret. Intelligence had me making a list. The resilience, and this took years, not weeks, was getting up every morning for 2.5 years and doing the next thing on the list. Calling the next bureau, sending the next dispute letter, keeping records, not letting the grinding tedium of recovery become a reason to give up. A 498 credit score is a genuinely demoralizing number when you know what you lost. But 498 is not a final answer. It's a starting point for the work. I'm at 728 now. Almost back. Serena built that number once through discipline and care, and she is building it back the same way. The difference is that this time, she knows exactly what she is capable of withstanding. And she knows that the people who asked her to carry the debt quietly were never going to help her carry it. That knowledge is not bitterness, it's just information. And she is the kind of person who knows what to do with information. So is the version of herself that comes next.